Xamarin. So Xamarin is your complete mobile solution. They've made it so you can develop mobile applications using the Xamarin platform. That's what you usually hear about. You can build native iOS, Android, and Windows apps all in C#. But they also offer a wide range of products. Xamarin has Xamarin Test Cloud. You can use Visual Studio Online services for building, and you can distribute using Hockey app and using. It used to be Xamarin Analytics. Now it's becoming part of Hockey app, but you can use Xamarin's offerings to monitor your application as well. And so we're going to cover these 5 aspects of all that Xamarin offers. So first, for developing mobile applications, native mobile applications, you can use Xamarin. But what is native? You've probably heard it thrown around, but what does it really mean? So I like to think of 3 important aspects for that. One is that it has a native user interface. They need to look and act correct across all devices for that correct platform. So iOS has to look like iOS, Android has to look like Android. For it to be truly native, you have to have access to the full SDK. So that means all the whiz-bang features like getting the accelerometer to work or whatever the device offers. You need to have access to that as a developer. And then getting native performance out of your mobile application needs to be fast and fluid. Otherwise, your users are going to notice delays and they're going to be upset with how the app performs. So companies like Facebook know this. That's why they made instant articles. They recently released this for browsing articles on the iPhone, and it's got a beautiful native experience. It takes full advantage of the iPhone's hardware and the great look of iOS. And to prove this point, here's a quote from John Gruber. He says, "Not only is native mobile code winning for app development, but with things like instant articles, native is making the browser-based web look like a relic, even just for publishing articles." So let's look at what it takes to architect mobile apps. We know that's what we want to do now, so how do you get there? So the current state of mobile app development is you go out and you build an iPhone app with Objective-C and Xcode. Then you'd have another team go out and build a Java application with Android Studio, another team for Windows phones, if you even target that at all, with C# and Visual Studio. You have multiple teams, multiple code bases. It's expensive and slow. One positive is you get great apps like delivered to that user's platform that take advantage of all the native features, but the negative is that your development's hampered by multiple code bases and fragmentation. Then you also have things like Cordova that use JavaScript and HTML and CSS. You write once, run it anywhere, but with performance issues and running into having the same UI across all devices, it doesn't look like that device's UI. So you have unhappy users, unhappy developers because they're frustrated trying to target all the different devices with one set of code, and you have increase in abandoned apps, and you're limited in what you can access on the phone to what's implemented for that particular platform, whether it's Cordova or what have you. So let's look at Xamarin's unique approach. So with Xamarin, you write C# code. You write it, a lot of it, you just share it across all different platforms, and then you can have a C# UI for the iOS apps. You can have a C# UI for Android or for your Windows phones. So the only thing that you're writing that's unique is the UI for each. And you're sharing a lot of your code across all the apps. So that's the traditional approach. But with Xamarin Forms, you can write code for all the UIs, just write it once and share that across all the devices. So we'll talk more about Xamarin Forms later, but you can increase the amount of shared code. It's a new library for cross-platform user interface. Writing stuff in C#, you can also deploy to your server with the same shared code. So you're not just writing it for your different applications on Android, iPhone, and Windows phones. You're also deploying to your Azure server, or you can even deploy to a Linux server with Mono or Core CLR. So your application can be C# end to end. So why Xamarin? Let's talk about a few reasons for using it. So it is native. It has the three things we talked about earlier. It has the native user interface that apps need to look and act correct on each platform. You have access to the full software development kit, which we need in order to get the latest and greatest features. And you have native performance, so the app is fast and fluid. Another reason to use it, it's included in Visual Studio. So at the Build conference this year, Microsoft announced that Xamarin will now be included in Visual Studio. So which is pretty sweet. It's free. Even in the free community edition of Visual Studio, you still have access to Xamarin. It's a large system to download, but once you get it installed, it's pretty sweet. Now, .NET is native. It's everywhere, and it's open source. So in March, Xamarin announced that the Mono project, which is their open source implementation of .NET, is being contributed to the .NET Foundation, which so they're putting it out there online for you to access all the source code for everything. Used to be that they had some mobile-specific improvements that were proprietary, but now even that's released under the MIT license. It's all out there. You can go to open.xamarin.com to go and view all these open source SDKs. So they have the iOS, the Mac, Android, Forms, bindings, and plugins. All that's available on open.xamarin.com. So if you want to dive into the source code, you're free to do it. Even commit pull requests. And they encourage you to do that. So now you can use Xamarin, write C# and deploy on all of your devices just by writing your app once with shared code. Everything in C#. So why C#? So I like it because it's a strongly typed language. You can use Visual Studio. It's my favorite IDE. But yes, .NET. You can even use F# for Xamarin applications, but I'm more familiar with C#. So I'm going to talk about some reasons why C# is awesome. You get Lambda expressions and LINQ, whether you're more comfortable with the Fluent syntax, or this is, I think, the LINQ query expression syntax. It can really reduce the amount of code you have to write. C# works with XML easily. You have event handling and delegates. Also, you've got a ton of great libraries available, like JSON.NET. And this is an example that shows how easy it can be with JSON.NET to serialize Bob, and then you can deserialize him back into a person again, just with a few lines of code. I thought that was a great example. And here's another example of how you can really simplify your code. So the left is Objective-C, which you'd write for the iPhone. And on the right, we've got a snippet in C# with Xamarin. They're taking advantage of object initialization syntax for declaring the people. And just with one line of code, they're able to select the name from all those people and put that in an array. So you can write beautiful and maintainable code. Also, with C#5, you now have async and await. So it's much easier to read through it and see, because it's in a linear fashion when you use async and await. You don't have to write like a callback and then respond to all that. The compiler does a lot of the magic for you, which really simplifies your code and your life. It resembles synchronous code, but really this is getting all the benefit of being asynchronous.
.NET Mono supports every feature.
Yeah, I believe so. So they have all the C# 5 features. I know that with Roslyn. They even have IntelliSense for these C# features. And that's not just in Visual Studio, but also in their, on the Mac, they have a Xamarin Studio. So you can simplify your native methods with async and await. There's another example of how it looks a lot cleaner than Objective-C. No need for a callback block. Here's an example between Java and C#. You can see how easily it is to do plus equals for your event. You don't have to declare on item click listener and then on item click. Just plus equals and write what you're trying to do. And you can take this and make it even easier, or even better with async and await. So now it's asynchronous instead of synchronous. So it's pretty cool. So let's go into how Xamarin works. So if you've ever developed for a Windows platform, these .NET namespaces might look familiar. And then if you're going to deploy to Windows Phone or to the store, you also have to use, you can use these libraries. Well, with Xamarin, it's very similar. You still have access to the .NET libraries, and they provide libraries for accessing the different features of the iPhone or of iOS. So you can access MapKit, UIKit, iBeacon, Core Graphics, Core Motion. It's not just some of them. That's 100. That you get 100% coverage of all the iOS API. And with Android, it's the same thing. You get text-to-speech, action bar, printing framework, all of their API.
Just check for what kind of device you're on and use the appropriate calls for.
Yeah, and there's syntax for checking which device. So if you're writing it in Xamarin Forms, it's like XAML. You've got XML block. You say on platform, and then you can say which platform you want to target, and then whatever feature you're writing for that particular platform.
Now, when you actually build it on a device, does it take out that code that doesn't apply to that device?
I believe that's how it works. Yeah. There'd be no reason to ship your Android code to the iPhone.
Right.
So do you normally have a separate project per iOS and Android, or do you think it would just be one project with compiler correctly?
You'd have separate projects for iPhone, for the Android, and then you could add more or less code to that particular project. Like if you want to write everything with Xamarin Forms, you can put all your UI code in a shared project. But you can also go the route of putting all your UI code in the particular platform's project. So you can put all your Android UI code in the Xamarin Android project. And then, so a little bit more about what you were asking about, how it compiles down. You'd take your C# code, .NET libraries, and bindings, and do ahead of time compilation. So this, I would assume that this process would strip out any of the directives that say it's for a different platform. It would build an ARM binary, which would run natively for the iPhone. And then for the Android, takes advantage of just-in-time compilation, legit. And this is always up to date. For iOS, you get same-day support, and there's not as many releases of that as there is for Android, I believe. And then with Android, it typically takes weeks or months for them to roll out their new versions to the phones. So during that time, Xamarin works on supporting their new features. So it's up to date by the time it would be on your phone. The difference between iOS and Android is the same day it's released, or the next day, people usually have the new version of iOS. But with Android, they have to test it on all the different devices. It might be 4 months until you get your update after they release the new release of Android. It's been, let's see, 4 months after Android 4.4 was on the market. It still only had a 1% adoption rate. Another great benefit of Xamarin is sharing code. So if you were to create a new library, this is what it'd look like. You go to File, New Project, find Class Library Portable under the Templates in Visual Studio, and it asks you, what platforms you want to target, and they'll add a reference to the .NET DLL with that particular profile that includes support for all those platforms. You get access to all of your favorite libraries, like JSON.NET was my example earlier. But you can use NuGet to add them to your project. So it makes it really easy with their package manager in Visual Studio. And if on the left, if you're using Xamarin Studio on the Mac, you get the same sort of nice package manager. You can share projects. So I believe with that you can see the code of your other projects when you're sharing them, pull them in. And here's some code sharing stats using just 2 example applications. iCircuit is a iPhone app, or I guess iPhone and Android and Mac and Windows Phone that in some cases shares 90% of its code with the other platforms. So these are real apps, and you can see how much code they're sharing across different platforms. Any questions about? I know I'm going kind of fast because I had a lot of material, but any questions about this so far? So let's talk about the development experience. You get Visual Studio integration with the Xamarin platform, so you can load up. Here's an example where they're going through and creating stuff for the iPhone right there in Visual Studio. You can still use all of your favorite Visual Studio tools like ReSharper, Team Foundation Server. You can use Azure ASP.NET. Your favorite code coverage and profiling tools, all in Visual Studio, even with the Community Edition. And then if you go to deploy your application to an iPhone, you have to have a Mac to do the deployment, just because that's the rule that Mac has imposed, that Apple has imposed. So they offer remoting tools where you can, right there in Visual Studio, remote through your Mac and even pull up a connected iPhone. And they have a simulator where you can even do multi-touch gestures on their simulator. So if you have like a Microsoft tablet that allows multi-touch, you can do those gestures on your screen, and they'll go all the way through to the simulator of the iPhone, which I thought was really cool. You have buttons like home, which would simulate taking you back home on the iPhone, lock the screen, take screenshots, settings. You could right-click anywhere in the simulator to pull up your options that are available and trigger things like shaking the phone. You can trigger rebooting the phone, and all that stuff. Also, if you're using a Windows tablet and you have a stylus, you can do like hard press and soft press to get like the calligraphy sort of stuff. So I think Windows calls it stylus, and then on the iPhone it's called pencil. But all that's supported right there, even in the simulator in Visual Studio.
Is that what Visual Studio 2015?
Yes. And you don't have to have the Pro version or Ultimate or anything. Even the free Community Edition of Visual Studio. Another great thing is you can plug in your iPhone to your PC, and it'll simulate you plugging it into the Mac. So if you're doing your deployment through the Mac that you're remoting to, it takes care of all that for you, so you don't have to worry about it.
So if I don't have a Mac, I could still not buy it on my other phone. I could still see what it looks like on my phone.
You have to have someone on the team with a Mac that's deploying through the Mac.
Yeah. Pretty much. They do have a cloud deployment service that you can pay for, but that would be really slow to go through that and then wait.
Do you still need a Mac for that to sign?
No.
in?
I don't think so.
But, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it for untested code, but if you're just doing a release, if you already know it works, which, how are you going to know it works? But you can deploy without a Mac through their cloud services. They give you a certain amount of free time, computer time to do those deployments, and then you can pay for it after that. But we'll talk more about that when we talk about Hockey app. We'll get to that later. So if you're using a Mac, they have Xamarin Studio. A lot of the same features that you get in Visual Studio, you can get in Xamarin Studio for developing these Xamarin applications. You can still do code analysis. You can upload to what they have, a flight test. You have your version control integration, whether you're using Git or Subversion. You get code completion, code navigation. They've tried to make it an easy transition from Visual Studio. So if you're already used to Visual Studio on a PC, you can use Xamarin Studio on a Mac pretty easily. And the same solutions and projects should work in both of them. Then if you're making an Android app, they have a designer for you. So this would be not the Xamarin Forms, but if you're doing a separate UI for iPhone and Android, this is the Android designer. Drag and drop, although I don't really like drag and drop because then you end up with weird margins and things, but it supports that. You can see what it looks like as you're implementing things. And then for iOS, they have a designer as well. They say they're the world's first iOS designer. Then Xamarin also offers components, which would be like a signature pad or a Salesforce SDK, which you can just add to your app real easily. They make it real easy, just a lot like adding a NuGet repository. This would be more on the UI side of things. You just drop a component in an app, and like Google Maps is another one. And those are specific to Xamarin.
How does it handle like devices with different form factors? Like the editor had like the standard phone, but you had a bigger phone or a tablet. You could do it for each target.
I guess are you talking about for the individual component, or in general?
Yeah. Well, can you make it so like this will be a text field that'll grow if it's in a bigger form factor, or?
Yeah, I assume that it depends on whoever's making the component to code it that way.
With the drag and drop support.
With the drag and drop support, like
Well, I mean, that's,
we were talking.
If you did that, you're going to get some potentially like wacky text.
Yeah, I don't know about with this designer. It'd be pretty hard to get it to resize fluidly, I would think, but I haven't really played with that a whole lot, so I don't know. It's a lot better if you're coding it by hand. You know what you're doing, and you can set it to resize as you're using different devices. Especially with the Android, since you have so many different devices with different sizes and things.
So if you're testing with different form factors, you're testing with different emulators, how will the emulator, how can you do the testing using an emulator? Is it good for a specific device so that you can...
Yeah, so they have a ton of emulators available, and you can test, like if you're concerned about how it might look with a particular one, you can load that one up and see how it should look. But they also have like a solution where you can run tests on all the different emulators and set up those tests. And we'll talk more about that if I get to it. But
Does their test cloud use emulators, or is that actual devices, or how does that work?
I think they say they're actual devices. They have like 2,000 different devices. But I don't know how they manage that. It seems like a massive undertaking, especially if you need it like right away. But they have Xamarin Test Cloud where you can run your automated tests that you've set up, and it'll just tell you whether they pass or fail. And then they have Xamarin Test Cloud Live, which allows you to pull up like that actual device screen and go through and you have time that you're allotted on that device where you're the only person using it. So I assume if you're using the just regular Xamarin Test Cloud, it may be on the device, but it's not where you can modify it as you're going along. It's just you set up your test and then you run it, and it goes into a queue to be run after other people's tests and things.
Do you know how much you have to pay for the test cloud live?
They have different levels, so like if you're a team of one guy and you're doing just one app, you get like an hour or what they call a device hour, where you might have 5 different devices. You could run 5 devices at a time, and if they each take 12 and a half minutes, then that's an hour of time. So with the free, you just get one device that you can run at a time, and then I think the next step up is 3 devices at a time, and you get like 3 hours a day or something. 1 hour a day, 3 hours a day, and then you can go up and pay for more as you go. There's different tiers for that depending on what you need. If you're getting started developing, I really would recommend finding one of their pre-built app templates. You can see kind of how the app is put together and step through the project and look at sort of how it's architected. They have a lot of free ones available, like My Shop, the store application, Moments photo sharing. I remember a while back they had the store application where anyone that did download it and play with it could submit a request for a free t-shirt, and they'd give out these free t-shirts with CSharp on them. They just say CSharp because everything's in CSharp. They also have one like a leaderboard for games. I thought about maybe doing one for the office. We have a foosball table in there. A lot of people like to play on that. So you could have a ladder system set up, a mobile app, one for us. But I ran out of time. I didn't do that before this talk, but maybe later. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Xamarin Forms. This is if you're trying to write your UI once and target all the different platforms. So like this is the traditional approach, and then with Xamarin Forms, you take out having to do separate UIs with that traditional approach. Like you might have a separate project for each of those, but with Xamarin Forms, you have one project for doing the UI for all the devices. So they offer 40 plus pages, layouts, and controls, two-way data binding, navigation, animation API, dependency service, and a messaging center. And if you're used to doing a WPF app, anyone in here do WPF? No? A little bit? You'd end up using the same model view model pattern for developing your Xamarin Forms app. And it's very similar. Here's some of the different pages. So you might have a page for each section of your app. It might be content or master detail. And then with the tabbed, that's an interesting one because it's different on each platform. So with Android, it's on top. With Windows phones, you have a pivot control, but it's still just called a tabbed layout. So even though your Xamarin Forms says, tabbed layout, when you go and look at it on each device, it's stylized for that particular device. And you're still only writing the code once. Of course, it makes it a little tougher when you go to debug it and you're looking at the different devices and trying to figure out, why it looks good on one and not the other. But then you have layout. So there's different layouts where, like, as you add controls, how they flow one after the other. The stack one's really simple because it's just top to bottom. Then you can use a grid if you want to get really complex layouts. Here's a list of the controls. A lot to remember as you're getting started, but. Right, so you have extensibility. You can easily extend and embed custom views, mix and match screens, call native APIs, or even migrate to a traditional app and share your backend logic. You also have access to all these ecosystems of controls. I know some people in the office use Telerik, I believe. Sync Fusion, they're based out of Raleigh or Research Triangle somewhere. They're close by. They're even having a Xamarin Dev Days, which they're going to have like a full day of talks on Xamarin coming up, I think, on the 30th. That'll be at the Sync Fusion offices. So not too far away from here if anyone's interested after this in learning more about Xamarin. I don't know the actual location, but it's outside of Raleigh. Durham Research Triangle. That's September 30th. Yeah. I don't think very many people said they were familiar with WPF, but I highlighted on here some of the differences and some of the similarities between controls. So if you're used to using one, you've got to really keep this in mind to remember that you're supposed to be doing a different one, because your development, a lot of it looks exactly the same, but then you're using a different control for the same thing. So like checkbox, if you're used to calling it a checkbox, now all of a sudden it's a switch. So I'm not really sure why it's been changed, but it's really important to keep that in mind. And then the same thing with binding. They've changed it from data context to binding context. So that's one thing that threw me. I kept typing in data context and wondering why I was getting errors. And it's like, oh yeah, they changed it to binding context. Here's a little bit of what we talked about earlier, which was customizing it to different platforms. So you've written your shared UI, but you decided you want to increase the padding on the iPhone in a particular spot, just to make it, work well with everything else. So you can say on platform and change the thickness for iOS, and then leave it all zeros for your Android and for your Windows phone. So that's what that looks like. It'll be right there in your XAML. Here's a little bit more XAML, how you can get a native UI from shared code. And they've got, if you look at entry, a little bit about binding, the text fields. And then on the left you can see how they look differently, but they look how it should look for that particular device.
Where do you do all the styling? Like there's not like a CSS or an equivalent type concept?
A lot of it is in XAML. You can put it at the top. You define like your style. If you've done any WPF, it's the same way as styling for WPF with Windows. So
Logo style's kind of wonky, but
it's not as
do it.
good
Not
as,
like CSS.
yeah, it's not like CSS, but you still define a class and then use that class. And then they have this weird concept of triggering a change to the style for that class. So you can define triggers later on for what might change as a user interacts with it. But you can make it where you put the style just once and then you don't have to repeat it over and over again, which is really good. I don't know if anyone's too familiar with Xamarin as it was, but these are some of the new things that they've talked about. Like they just added URL navigation into your application. So like you can click on a link in a website and it'll open your app to that particular thing in your app. So they had a conference called Evolve, and they had an app for the conference. And so like you could click on a link and it would navigate you to a particular speaker's page or to a particular talk that was going on at the conference. They've just added XAML Previewer, which was something that it was sorely lacking. Like if you tried to just write XAML, you'd have to deploy it and then figure out what's wrong and then go back and change it without seeing a live preview. And with a live preview, it makes it a lot easier to just change things and see them on the fly. So this is relatively new. And it's still in preview mode, which means that it's got bugs, but better to have it with bugs than to be without it. They've just added data pages where you can just import your data to a contacts or an events thing and make a full page with everything just by populating it with your data set. So you can use that across those data pages across different applications. Like if you're one shop that's making a data page for different apps, you can just load those into your app and really make some great UIs in just a matter of minutes. They added themes, so you can change the style for your entire app from like a light theme to a dark theme. Native embedding, so there's some controls specific to Android or specific to iOS that you can add. There's a little bit of code of how you might do that for the fab icon. Let's see, we already go through the animation. So you go over some plugins. So a unique aspect of Xamarin Forms is the abstraction over the user interface. But you also have platform-specific functionality that you might want to add, and that's where plugins come in. So you have your shared C# backend, but then for iOS or Android or Windows Phone, you might have a particular feature that you want to add to your UI for that device. So maybe that's battery or GPS or lights. Those are typically platform-specific code, but with plugins, you don't have to write it for each platform. You can just write one. So if you want to use the microphone, the speak, you have a common API for speak hello world, and it does, for the iPhone, they have their library called AV Speech Synthesizer, where on the Android it's text to speech, and on Windows it's speech synthesizer, but they're all doing essentially the same thing. So Xamarin abstracts that away and just makes it so you can write speak hello world, and it'll work on all the different devices.
So it's true quality.
Okay.
Does it have an API the other way that you can do text to speech or speech to text?
I would be surprised if there wasn't. Yeah.
Like running automation.
Yeah. I know it does camera settings. They have one for notifications, GPS, battery. Yeah, so probably.
Sweet.
All right, I know we got a few questions about testing earlier. So let's go over some of the things that you have in Xamarin Test Cloud. So there are a few challenges to testing on all these different devices. You have fragmentation. There's also the app complexity. your fast release cycles, short sessions, high mobile user expectations, all those combine to make it really hard to test a mobile application on all of your different platforms and devices. Quality is hard. So here's a look at some of the numbers, like screen size. 57 different screen sizes on Android. So if you want to make sure that control resizes appropriately, it's a lot to test. And this is just sort of the market, how as it looks according to OpenSignal. They compiled the data on who's using which platform or which Android devices. And this is from August 2015. I'm sure that within a year it's going to be even worse. So thousands of iOS and Android APIs, got your third-party libraries. Your app is complex. One thing to reduce some of this is to have the simple commands for simulating on all your different devices. You can simulate maybe a tap or a scroll or a swipe, and Xamarin makes a concept for those that would work across all your devices, and then you can add those together in a Xamarin UI test project. So you create a UI test project and add your commands for what you're going to do as far as interacting with the app. So you might scroll down, so they have a command for scrolling down. Take a screenshot so that you can see what it looked like on that device at that point in time. Simulate a tap. So this works whether you're using Xamarin Forms or if you're using separate UIs for each system. You write your tests once and it'll go through and perform those tests using the UI test project. Also, who wants to write your tests? If you just want to use the app, they have this recorder that'll notate exactly what actions you're taking. So if you scroll down to a certain person on the page and you click that, open up a new page, all of that, it just follows along with you and will write your test for you just as you're performing it on the simulator. And then you can replay that test and ship it up to the cloud so that you can test it on multiple devices at the same time.
What does your test look like? Is it like JSON or?
No, C#.
C#.
Everything, yeah,
So
C#.
when you play, it's actually writing C# code when you record?
Yes. Pretty cool. So you might name your method login, and it does like wait for element to load, takes a screenshot, just all of that is in C#. You can see the Lambda syntax, but yeah. They also have it for the Mac. So if you're in Xamarin Studio, and then once you've created your UI test, you can upload it to Xamarin Test Cloud, and they'll take care of running your tests for you. And you can choose all these devices. They've got thousands of devices that you can choose from to run your tests on. And just for subscribing, you do get free device time. I think it's like an hour a day for free. This is what Pinterest and Slack use, even though they don't write their application or their main applications with Xamarin. They still use Xamarin Test Cloud to test their applications. So you don't have to write your application using Xamarin to test it. So traditionally, what you might do to test your device is upload it to the cloud, run it on one device, then run it on another. But with Xamarin Test Cloud, depending on your subscription level, you can run it on, say, 5 devices at once. And it'll really cut down on how long it takes for you to run your tests. So it immediately tells you if you got any bugs or if there are errors while running your tests for that particular device. All right, let's move on to building your app. You can use Visual Studio Team Services, and they integrate with Xamarin, so you can do your code, your work, build, test, and release, all through Visual Studio Team Services. Here we typically use Jira for managing, but you could use Visual Studio Team Services for managing like your work items and your bug tracking things. They have Kanban, Scrum, dashboards. You can capture, prioritize, and track your work. And then all that would flow in to their continuous integration that they've set up. You can just add tasks. So they have a like build and sign Android project task. They have test in Xamarin Test Cloud. So all that's included and integrates very nicely if you're doing, you know, the Microsoft approach here. Any questions about how that works?
Team Services works with Git also?
Yeah, it works with Git. I see them actually promoting that more than using TFS. But Git and Subversion, if you use Subversion.
Digital version's free too. It's nice. It's what one build acre.
So it can do the build for all your platforms?
Yes. What they use for releasing new versions of your app. So say someone's already downloaded it and you've just built a new version. They have this thing called Hockey App. And hockey is a play on words for ad hoc. So you can do, that's anything outside of like the App Store. So iPhone, on iPhone devices, if you're installing an update outside of their App Store, it's called an ad hoc installation. So Hockey app does it ad hoc. It just installs just through the user using the device. They get a notification and they can upgrade to like the latest release. And that's Hockey app kind of grew out of that.
You don't need all the device IDs or anything like that?
All the device IDs for who's installed it? Or?
I thought with iOS you had to be connected to the laptop you were deploying it from, and if it weren't connected, you had to have all the device IDs.
I don't know.
Not really related to Xamarin, just related to.
I think I've read that Hockey App gets around that somehow. I don't know how. But I think that's
That
something
would be
you
really
use to push
super
things
cool.
out.
This is a pain in the butt maintaining all the IDs of all the devices.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if they've originally installed it through the App Store, you've got a record of the ID.
Like, say you haven't pushed to the App Store yet.
Oh, I don't know if you can do it without pushing to the App Store yet. It may be that this takes place after that.
Because I've done that before with Hockey App, where you basically just silo. But I mean, it's got to be done with like some kind of distribution profile where you don't need to get. Because if you've ever done like an ad hoc deployment or an enterprise deployment, you're not going to get device IDs for everybody in the company.
Yeah.
It's just signed and like it's verified that it's a developer that Apple has like the OS run on your device. You might have to go to settings and like choose to cross that certificate, but I think
Cool.
I did read that you can set up teams of, say like you have people that you've assigned to test your app or a new deployment. You can ship that particular release to that particular team and have them test that, that new feature or what have you. You can have another team that you ship a different release to test a different feature. And Hockey App somehow manages all that. So, and they used to have Xamarin Analytics. It's a symbol on the right, but that's coming together all under Hockey App now. Now that Microsoft's bought Xamarin. Hockey App does the ad hoc distribution, but it also does real-time monitoring, native and managed crash reports, all from the CSharp API. Here's a screenshot of the dashboard that they've created. You can see how many crashes you have per day, how many users have been impacted, the particular operating systems, all of that. And you even get it, you can dive down into particular exceptions that you're seeing. So here there's a throw index out of bounds exception that they dove into. to see which devices were experiencing that. You get a report over time, how many. So Xamarin, your complete mobile solution for developing with the Xamarin platform, testing with Xamarin Test Cloud. You can use Visual Studio's online services to do your building, Hockey app to distribute and to monitor. And then to learn more about all this, you can use Xamarin University. They offer live online classes. They have office hours where you can talk to someone that's, an expert in a particular thing. And I think the main thing that they're trying to sell people on is the classes for certification. So if you like to get certified and want to become, a certified Xamarin expert, you can sign up. They have a 30-day free trial, which I tried and I didn't really use it much. Now it's expired, but there's just so much free content out there to learn with, other than, this is a paid subscription. If you're really looking to learn more, I would suggest going on YouTube and looking at Xamarin talks from like the Evolve conference this past year. There's a lot of free talks on there. But if you are hunting a certification and you want to sign up for this, it's like $2,000 for the first year, $1,500 each year after that. If we've got time, I've got a few other things to touch on. So one thing that they just released as a preview is the Profiler. So if you're having issues with your app, kind of getting bogged down at a certain point, you don't know what's causing things to freeze or run slowly, you can see real-time information on what's running, how much memory it's taking, and just get details about what is causing your app to slow down. Find bottlenecks and memory leaks, stuff like that. So you can see particular processes that might be causing things to slow down, and take a snapshot at any particular time. I've also got a couple of user success stories from companies that have used Xamarin. One, Alaska Airlines. So they decided to switch over and make their app in Xamarin, deploy it to iPhone, Android, Windows apps. So they have a pretty huge team working on this enterprise level. I've sort of taken on learning it so I can do my side projects and deploy. I want to make some stuff for my Beehive to monitor the Beehive remotely and see like the weight in real time and pull that up on my phone. We've got a few other ideas like related to chess. But whether you're using Xamarin to save time or trying to get massive deployments like Alaska Airlines, can really make things easier on you. And then another customer they have was Cinemark. Which is $2.8 billion in annual revenue. You can see showtimes. It's pretty much everything.
Do you know if you can do wearables? Like Xamarin
Yes.
Forms?
You can do like Android app, Watch, Apple Watch. Yes, I know you can do that.
Pretty cool.
One thing I wanted to test it out on, I haven't gotten a chance to yet, is Raspberry Pi, because Raspberry Pi runs universal Windows.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they have a universal Windows, deployment for Xamarin. So that therefore, I would think that the Raspberry Pi could run a Xamarin app as well. So.
Sweet.
But yeah, definitely your watch.
Yeah, so it could be Xbox then.
Yeah, the Xbox is supported. Sweet.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.